Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. In this update, we've got a persistent northwest flow aloft, and that's going to be the culprit over the next couple of days that'll bring some big time hail producers and wind events, especially into the overnight hours. So let's walk you through the overall setup going forward. You can actually see on the big picture, we've got a more active subtropical jet stream out here in the equatorial Pacific. That's helping to feed the abundance amount of moisture, especially the heating elements down here into the central part of the US, where the temperatures have been really well above average over the last couple of days. And the dew points are surging high as well. Numerous dew points well into the upper 60s, if not in the 70 range. At the same time, we've got a persistent northwest flow aloft. And after that daytime heating, the atmosphere starts to overturn. And when that does, that creates big time supercell thunderstorms, and then the persistent northwest flow aloft will keep diving these down to the southeast, elevating that severe threat and also keeping those storms alive over several hundred miles. So let's take a look at the setup going forward for today, because these are going to be some big time wind events. I don't think it really gets going until really after about 6 o'clock, especially into the overnight hours. So we should see numerous supercells start to form along this boundary here, along the warm front in portions of Nebraska, as well as into Iowa, as well going into Missouri here, into Illinois. As these form into a mesoscale convective system, these will be diving southeast into the overnight hours, eventually impacting portions of southern Illinois as well as Kentucky into western Tennessee. There's another pocket of energy too that's going to activate along the dry line. Again, this looks to be after 6 o'clock type of event. Numerous thunderstorms start to explode along the dry line. Those could be big time hail producers out here towards the Childress region, out here towards the Abilene region. We could be seeing some golf ball to ping pong size hail. There is your hail core, really elevated, or really an extended hatched risk for large hail, anywhere from that golf ball to ping pong to even some, upwards to maybe even tennis ball size type variety, especially late this evening into the overnight time frame. So definitely be on high alert. So if you are in the market for a weather station, I definitely highly recommend the Tempest Weatherflow weather station. This is the one I've actually personally had myself. I literally had it for about 3 years. I was one of the first ones when they did the Kickstarter about 3 years ago. They just actually had their 3 anniversary. The cool thing about it is it's all solar, and it only takes about 10 minutes to install. So if you're definitely in the market for one, I definitely highly recommend this one. It's the best one I've ever had, and I've had a bunch of them over the years. So if you'd like one, I do have a discount code of 10% and free shipping, and here is the link, and I'll definitely have that in the description below, so you can easily just click on it and possibly order one for yourself. But man, after we get into sunset, I definitely feel like the atmosphere is going to be overturning out here in West Texas. We could see numerous supercells start to light up along the dry line, but I'm especially concerned up here towards Nebraska, getting into Iowa, back into portions of Illinois, especially as we get into the overnight hours. These could be really activated, and if these supercells really start to take off, and especially when they start diving southeast, they could be really some bow echoes really starting to bow out in these areas, and really have some intense winds associated with them. I'm talking 70, upwards to 80 mile per hour wind gusts, and some big time hail producers within that 4, 5, 6 hour window, as these storms will hit peak intensity and going to be diving down here to the southeast into the overnight hours. And it could be going into, say, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 o'clock into the morning as you wake up for your Monday morning commute. If I stop the clock here and look at some of the latest high resolution guidance here, this is about 3 o'clock in the morning, showing a significant MCV system, mesoscale convective vortex type system, really pinwheeling off the main mesoscale system and then diving down into southeast. And those could be big time wind producers into the overnight hours. So definitely, be on high alert and secure all loose objects within this region, because these could really be packing a punch into the overnight hours this evening, and that's for tonight. Here's the estimated winds that could be associated with it from this particular setup as it gets going right here into portions of Nebraska, fishtails off to the east. And then once it gets into Iowa, I think it takes that southeast turn in towards Illinois. And then when it takes that southeast turn, we'll have all the high wind producers. And like I said, some of these could be upwards to 70, 80 mile per hour. Not as intense as down here into West Texas, but those still could be strong on a much more isolated type nature. But that's just for today. And it continues into tomorrow. So the same type of setup goes into tomorrow. So the active dry line into far west Texas gets going into the heat of the afternoon. And then we'll also have another pocket of energy up here to portions a little bit further south this time into portions of central and southern Missouri. You know, portions of central and southern Illinois, Indiana, right here in this culprit into western Kentucky, going into portions of northern Arkansas into the later afternoon into the evening time frame. Again, here's the overall setup as the atmosphere starts to overturn. It really starts to amplify, and it doesn't take much for these to become supercell thunderstorms. We're basically talking from 0 to supercell in about 20 minutes in this type of environment. Once it basically gets activated, and it could really, once it gets activated, really start to expand in nature too. So definitely concerned. And once these form, these will be diving southeast into the overnight time frame. So again, as we go into Tuesday, it's another typical type of event. We get daytime heating producing thunderstorms. Every day is different. This day is the boundary setting up again along the dry line and further out here into western Oklahoma, western Kansas. Things could get going into the heat of the afternoon. And this is a day 3 risk. So I definitely expect this to be upgraded as well. And these will be diving southeast into the overnight time frame. But it's really not until Wednesday. I think by Wednesday, the overall change in the upper level pattern really starts to unfold and take shape, take a different tone. And we'll be watching for this ridge of high pressure start to move out of the way and shift a little bit further off to the east. That will create us more of a southerly flow out of the Gulf, but a much more moist atmosphere down here in Texas. At the same time, we've got a fairly significant trough that's going to be moving in from the west and setting up shop into portions of the Four Corners region and kind of really get blocked with this ridge of high pressure really starting to build and amplify over the top. That just helps sink these pressures underneath as well, but also blocks them and doesn't really allow them to go anywhere for several days. So here's the setup as you go by Thursday. So you got that ridge of high pressure, you got the high pressure that'll create off to its east. That puts the lower pressures off to the west. That'll create the more southerly flow out of the Gulf. Gulf is plenty of juice into that atmosphere. Once you pick up some of that, that moistened latent heat content of the Gulf of Mexico and have those higher dew points, it's just going to ring out over Texas like a sponge, especially once you get blocked over these ridge of high pressure over the top. And then once you have that ridge out to the east, that's going to be a constant flow out of the Gulf of Mexico. And you can actually see it better on the overall water vapor transport index as the winds turn around from the south, and that'll bring the abundance amount of moisture all the way up into the central portions of the US, bringing heavy rains back into Texas, into portions of Oklahoma, getting into portions of Kansas, reaching up to Nebraska. By then, that won't be until the day on your Thursday timeframe, but definitely this is going to be the area that we're going to have to be more concerned about heavier rains, especially as we get towards the middle of next week and the end of the next week as well. So this area, further south across the southern plains through Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, will be on high alert for possibly some flash flooding type setups, as persistent southerly flow will be with us for several days to come. And these could be over time laying down some heavier rainfall going forward. So there's the setup by Friday. So by Friday, we've got that trough going to be setting up over the Four Corners region. We've got that persistent southerly flow. So that is just the perfect mechanism to bring heavy rainfall across portions of the southern plains. And that's exactly what I think is going to happen, because that trough just gets trapped underneath as this ridge of high pressure really starts to build and amplify over the top. So you'll start to see well above average temperatures start to build, especially over the Pacific Northwest, eventually build over Canada, and then eventually actually swing across portions of the Northeast. And then you get the trough just blocked underneath. That'll bring the more cooler conditions out here in the southern plains and portions of the Southwest, and also the much more unsettled conditions as well. And you can definitely see it by the simulated satellite as we go into next weekend. Boom, the bullseye is pretty much locked over Texas. There's going to be seeing the most rainfall out of any of you guys anywhere in the United States as this persistent ridge blocks the from the ridge to the northeast, and has that persistent southerly flow off the Gulf of Mexico. And this is exactly what the Climate Prediction Center is highlighting, with that ridge of high pressure almost dominating the Pacific Northwest, with well above average temperatures pulling back into that region for them by the middle of next week. And then we got that ridge draped across the eastern zones, while much of the central US gets locked under that trough and the southerly flow. And with that blocking over the top, that keeps the persistent unsettled weather and also cooler than average weather for a good part of the southern plains. And going forward as well, by the middle of next week, going into next weekend, that definitely looks to be a wetter time setting up with those two mechanisms in place. Then we have well above average precipitation anomalies draped across a good part of the deep south, but especially into a good part of the Southwest. And if we look at the overall anomalies of what we typically see this time of year, and this is already a wet time of year for a lot of these areas in the southern plains, we could be looking at well above average rainfall, especially the further south you live in Texas and towards the Rio Grande Valley, San Antonio, down there in the Houston area. They could be definitely concerning with some heavy rain, if not flooding rains, by the time we head into middle of next week. But the whole state of Texas really gets socked with heavier rainfall going into Oklahoma, and then that will persist really into our central states. So here's this, the setup going forward under that ridge of high pressure. It's pretty much dominating with the ridge and the sinking air for them. The more unsettled weather goes bye-bye, the ridge and the drier weather moves in for the Pacific Northwest. And then we've got the central northern states, locked under that persistent southerly flow as well. So the central US really gets socked with heavy rainfall. And then at the beginning, where I showed you that persistent northwest flow over the next couple of days, you'll be above average over here in Illinois, going into Indiana, as well as into the Ohio region. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me in the next update, why I protect you before and after the storm.